Hi all, my name is Kenzie Kozar and today I'm going to be doing my short presentation of the book Unearth from our short stories book. This short story is written by Alicia Elliott, and at first glance it's pretty eerie and creepy, but this is much like a lot of the other short stories we analyze in this class, so that's another reason I chose this one, was because I think we could relate it a lot to some of our past readings from the semester. Our story begins with our main character, Elizabeth, starting off at the construction site where a new fast food chain is being built. It is here at this construction site that Elizabeth is contacted by local authorities as well as construction workers, as they have found remains of her child brother that had gone missing a few decades ago. He was 5 years old when he went missing, and nobody could really elaborate on what exactly happened to him during this time. The mother in our story, Mary, had just recently converted to an Anglican church and was under the watchful eye of Father Landry. Father Landry had renamed Mary as well as her two children from their Indian names to the names of Elizabeth and Henry that were more traditional and common amongst the churchgoers. Father Landry suggested to Mary and Henry and Elizabeth that Henry go to a special kind of residential school to learn more about the goodness of God and the backbone of his newly found religion. But to Mary's dismay, she basically got no letters from her son and no recollection that he had actually made it to where he was promised to be. After months of not having any contact from her 5-year-old son, she decided to take it up with people at the church. But when she approached the church members, they had no idea what she was talking about, and they basically acted like she was a psychopath. After the church was not cooperating with Mary, she decided to go to local law enforcement, where they basically shrugged their shoulders and ignored her and didn't have anything to say to her. But when she approached Father Landry about the fact that her son was not with her, he had gone to a family emergency in Quebec, Canada. He was gone for 6 months, and every single day, Mary was basically distraught, didn't know what to do, and she had no one to go to except for the person that was supposed to guide her and her newly religious family, Father Landry. Father Landry ended up staying in Quebec, Canada for 3 years after the fact. When Father Landry came back from his 3-year trip to Canada for a family emergency, she saw him at the parish that he used to preach at, and she decided to confront him, and he acted like he knew nothing about Henry or their situation. So this is when Mary attacked him at the Sunday Mass. This later resulted in her being imprisoned. As a result of Mary being taken into custody, her daughter Beth, or Elizabeth, was taken to a new family and adopted. And she basically forgot all of her heritage, and that is what the core of this story is basically rediscovering who you are, even though people have stripped that from you. I have summarized this story. I will go into the different approaches that I saw throughout this story. And the first one I want to address is the psychological criticism. Psychologically, Elizabeth never got to really recognize the fact that her brother was gone, and she didn't really have a good coping mechanism when it came to it. Not to mention that her mother was shortly after taken away from her as well, and she was placed into a completely different environment. She mentally lost herself as a person and what her identity was, and she really had to hide it away and tuck it down because she was simply afraid due to the circumstances her brother and her mother had endured as a result of speaking out against the church or against the people that were powerful against them. When her brother's remains are found some decades later, I think the fact that she was shocked really showed the disconnect that she had to him as a child. The fact that he was ripped away, and she really didn't know how to cope with that. she was in shock, and her behaviors were well justified, as this was something from her past that was completely unearthed, basically, as the title exclaims. And I think that is why it really matches a psychological approach as to why our character Elizabeth may have acted the way she did and been so surprised with the findings of her younger brother. I used the quote, "She couldn't shake the image of a child's tooth being pounded into beef patties or tiny brown limbs being thrown into an industrial sized grinder," as an example of how psychologically she is feeling and mentally where her state is at, because she cannot get the image of her little brother's body being manipulated out of her head, even though this incident occurred around 55 years ago. The next approach that I saw in this story was the sociological criticism. I saw this because of the historical effects that are brought in with this story, such as the Mohawk Indians, and how our main character, Elizabeth, is dragged and ripped away from everything that made her identify herself as a Mohawk Indian. Because her mother goes to prison and she is forced to live with a family, she does not know her true identity. She doesn't know much about being a Mohawk Indian, and a lot of history comes up when her brother's remains are also collected from the site even years later. We can see that there was a disconnect with culture, and there was a disconnect with the true identity of who she was as a person, because the church came in and was basically trying to erase it. For the sociological approach, I decided to go for the paragraph exclaiming, "They liked her pale skin, her tragedy. They liked how she forced herself to smile. She excelled at school, excelled in her career, excelled at passing, at forgetting." I think this speaks a lot about the story and about our main character, Elizabeth, and how she's forced to kind of keep a lot of things down, and she's not really allowed to express herself and her identity. And I think as a result of this, and her adoptive family kind of pressuring her to not speak out against anything, she kind of loses that sense of her childhood and her heritage. Third approach that I found most prominent within this story was definitely gender criticism. We look at a single mother, Mary, who is just trying to find some comfort in her community, and she goes to a church, which is usually known to be a safe spot. Father Landry really takes advantage of Mary by taking her children, for one, erasing her heritage from those children, and taking her kids and herself away from everything she knows. Politically, I see this to fit really well into the gender criticism approach because of the fact that Father Landry is not a female, and he is a male, and he is having that overpowering, oversensitive, sexist type behavior because he knows he can get away with it in this case, because Mary is a single mother and does not have a lot of credibility and such compared to him, as he is the leader of the church. He knows what he's talking about. He's made those connections. The mother, Mary, behaves very erratically and crazy towards the end, but that is only because it is her motherly instinct. She wants to find her son. She wants to know who harmed him and who did this heinous crime to him, and she doesn't even know the extent of the crime, and she never will know because she is dead by the time his remains are found and what actually happened to him is found out. For the gender criticism, this part of a paragraph really stood out to me because I thought it was sickening, and I couldn't believe that someone could have just shrugged this off so easily. But it starts, and I quote, "There were no records. No records existed. She was mistaken. She went to the police, to the band council. They shrugged their shoulders and shook their heads." I thought this was very empowering for the church, as they basically were trying to prove that she was an insane woman when she was just being the nurturing, loving, caring mother that any mother would freak out about. And this is what I believe I just thought was the sickest part of the story, is no one wanted to help her find her lost son. Although there was a lot of takeaways that I could have gotten from this story, I believe the main takeaway that I received was the fact that no matter who you are or what is taken from you, the only thing that cannot be actually taken internally from you is your heritage, your memories, and your family. Despite the struggles that Mary, Henry, and mostly Elizabeth had faced, she dealt with a lot of grief and trauma early in her life, but even by the end of the story, she was able to identify who she was as a person again, even though it had been taken away from her previously. I thought this was a pretty inspirational story, and I thought this was also an educational story on how we can learn to not let awful things happen again. And I really enjoyed reading it, so I hope you all enjoyed my presentation, and it was a lot of fun to make, so thank you.